Where do you go to start thinking critically? How do you upgrade your mind, level up your reasoning, improve your intellect? By the end of this video, you'll know the foundations for critical thought and how to increase your critical thinking skills. My name is Jack. I'm here to help you think. And I want to welcome you to Critical Thinker, where you'll learn how to become brilliant. This video answers two questions: how to start thinking critically and where critical thinking begins. Those two questions sound similar, but they're very different. The crazy thing is, the answers to these two very different questions is found in one singular answer.
Who are you and how did you get in here?
I'm the locksmith. And I'm the locksmith.
You start from what you know and launch to what you don't.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
As simple as this principle sounds, it's the foundation of all knowledge and thought. You'll be in a different starting point than others watching this video. Number one, know the critical thinking realms. Throughout my undergrad, graduate, and doctoral education, I've discovered 12 realms of critical thinking.
Open your eyes.
You can click on the video here to learn what they are. Number two.
Who does number 2 work for?
Understand where you are in your knowledge of them. Are you an ace at logic? Have you harnessed the rules of evidence? Do you know how to prove someone is lying? What do you know, and where are you weak? Thinking critically is defined as disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, and informed by evidence. Of course, it is broader than that, as I've shown in previous videos. And in fact, that definition falls short as I'm laying out in this video. We don't need evidence for all thinking. Critical thinking encompasses evaluation, judgment, accuracy, precision, decisiveness, truth, and reality. It is skillfully evaluating information gathered from observation, experience, reasoning, and logic as a guide to belief and action. That's the goal. What is true? Your starting point in thinking critically determines how you gather and evaluate information, what you hold as real, and ultimately where you will end up. So you better get this part right, or your ship will land off course or possibly shipwreck. The problem is people don't even know what critical thinking is or how to gauge their proficiency at it. As laid out in our How to Think Critically video, foundationalism is the beginning point for learning how to think critically. We addressed where to start thinking critically. Now we look at where critical thinking begins. Welcome to Ground Zero, Base Camp, the launch pad.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Before we get into foundationalism, we need to touch on metaphysics because it's the basis for foundationalism. A foundation for foundationalism, you might say. Metaphysics is the philosophical term first introduced by Aristotle in the 4th century BC. Metaphysics are the foundational preconditions for all of reality. They're primarily concerned with relations, change, causation, and the nature of mind, matter, space, and time. Metaphysics is about reality and existence. It's a fancy philosophy word that means beyond the physical. Our video on scientific evidence helped introduce you to this most essential subject. More than the physical exists, and we need to be aware of what lies beyond, or maybe more accurately, what is before the physical world. Metaphysics is the study of being, existence, and reality. Metaphysical realities exist which make foundationalism possible. Stick around to the end where I share how critical thinking can lead to the best chocolate chip cookies in the universe.
Cookies!
Plus, I'll give you that recipe. So what is foundationalism? No one before the medieval age incorporated so many fields of knowledge as St. Augustine. He lived from 354 to 430 AD. Instead of separating the senses and the mind as empiricism and rationalism did, remember? Augustine synthesized the mind with the senses, estimating that the senses perceive the world in reality, and the mind then judges the truth of what the senses perceived. Augustine introduced some cognitive grounds for knowledge with what we can know for sure, certainties or self-evidential truths. Number one, we exist. Number two, we think. Number 3, we love our existence. He included mathematical truths, ethics, and morals, and posited that truth dwelled in the inner man. Thomas Aquinas lived from 1224 to 1274. He built upon what Augustine established in a monumental way, what is known today as a Thomistic view of first principles. Aquinas affirmed the synthesis of the mind and senses and added several helpful fields to the realm of knowledge. Aquinas' first principles, also known as Foundationalism. Here they are. Number 1, all knowledge is based on first principles. Otherwise, there would be no basis for knowing. Number 2, all first principles are self-evident, true in themselves without reference to anything else. Number 3, there are 5 basic first principles of knowledge. They are undeniable, and all thought is based on them. These are the basics of all thinking. When you think about them, you realize that you cannot think without them. Here they are. The first one, principle of non-contradiction. You learn this in logic. B is not non-B. Number 2, the principle of identity. B is B. Number 3, principle of excluded middle, either B or non-B. Number 4, the principle of causality. It's cause and effect relationships. And number 5, the principle of finality. Being acts for an end. Aquinas posited that first principles knowledge exists in the mind and not the senses, resulting from reason as self-evidential truths. First principles allow us to speak about things that are known, and from there, we speak about things unknown. From that foundation, through logical inference, we can access what is unknown from what is known. Without first principles, we can't think or comprehend anything. First principles are true and need no evidence, argument, or justification for why they're true. Self-evidential truths are in this category, for once one grasps a proposition or statement, it can't be denied as being true. For example, one must exist to deny one's own existence, which is self-refuting.
Dust. Wind. Dude.
If one denies the first rule of logic, non-contradiction, that A cannot be B at the same time and in the same sense, they are affirming it because you can't deny the rule without asserting its very existence. Think about it. If someone says logic does not exist, how do you respond?
Houston, we have a problem.
Oh, so you're saying logic exists? If they attempt to reinforce their statement that logic does not exist, they're relativizing all statements about reality. Literally, the opposite of what they are against could be affirmed because logic must be employed to say it doesn't. This should help you get it a little bit better. How do you respond to someone who tells you, you can't tell me what to do? Oh no? Don't you think it's inconsistent that you are telling me what to do then? Why is it that you get to tell me what to do, but I can't? If you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of the next critical thinking skills. Another example of self-evidential truth is there are no married bachelors. Once we understand the definition of married and bachelor, the sentence itself becomes redundant. Of course, there are no married bachelors because the words themselves have opposite meanings. Nothing leads us to first principles and self-evidential truths. They stand on their own, and once grasped, we intuitively understand them as true. When people think critically, they often springboard from what is known to what isn't, which is a correct step. But they are springboarding sideways instead of vertically. Most people reason by analogy. They look at a situation and liken it to something similar. A first principles rationalist goes to the root truths, literally the foundations, asking what truths the situation is grounded in. Reasoning by analogy is great and should be employed in some situations, like helping people understand what they don't already know. Because, like all knowledge, we are going from what is known to what is unknown. It makes sense to use an analogy about something our listener understands to help them comprehend something that they don't yet. When my child didn't understand what a treehouse was, I used something that he did know to help him understand what he didn't. A treehouse is like a playhouse, but up in a tree. Did I know how to build a treehouse before the pandemic? No. I started with what I already knew, basic construction knowledge and experience, and built from there. But first principles goes to the root causes, the foundations of the whole enterprise to assess the situation. Analogy looks sideways. Foundationalism looks downwards and upwards. The other night, I made a recipe from scratch that was somewhere between pankoken and a crepe. Now, I was familiar with the foundations of both recipes: flour, eggs, milk, baking powder, sugar, but I also understand the purposes for each ingredient and what they do when combined with each other. I harness that knowledge of the foundations that make the food the right consistency, flavor, and voila, très magnifique. Most people cook or bake by analogy. They follow the recipe that someone else created, and it all works out. Truly great chefs employ their foundational knowledge of individual ingredients and their chemistry when combined with other ingredients to create new and exciting dishes. To become a truly incredible critical thinker, begin switching from knowledge by analogy to knowledge by first principles or foundations. I don't want you to rely on someone else's critical thinking. I want you to think for yourself. You ever have mushy, wet cookies or hard as rock, solid cookies? Well, years ago, I made a batch of chocolate chip cookies and they kind of melted instead of rose. They were soft and squishy, and it set me on a quest. I wanted to know what made a cookie the perfect density. I searched deep into the individual ingredients, the foundations and first principles of baking, and discovered my mistake was in the type and amount of fat I was using, combined with the type and amount of rising agent, and the type and amount of sugars. I encourage you to test or research the effects of different ingredients, or you could stand on the shoulders of giants and use the recipe I invented. If you use my recipe, you'll be reasoning by analogy, but maybe it's not worth it for you to know every detail and effect of each individual ingredient. Reasoning by analogy is smart given the subject and motivations of the person. This channel will show you the nitty-gritty, the foundational truths for thinking critically, but in some ways you are learning by analogy. But you are learning, and sometimes we don't have the time to dive so deep, which is why I'm here. I don't want you to stay in analogical thinking, though. You're not here to learn what to think, but how to think. So use this channel as a starting place, your launch pad,
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
to go from what you know to what you don't. As promised, the critical thinking cookie recipe is down below. Take a screenshot and try it out at home. If you're curious about the 12 realms of critical thinking, click on the video to up your critical thinking game. And until next time, critical thinkers, think deeply.